¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días a todos.
Hello, good morning, everybody. This morning, it's a great pleasure for me to open with the first issue to be discussed at this fabulous seminar. And this is what we've entitled New Opportunities for the Mexican Market and in the Central American region. So thank you very much, José Luis, for your introduction. And as you pointed out, I'm the Executive Director of Global Risk in MAPFRE in Mexico, and I'm responsible for the development of the portfolio of major accounts, both private companies and state companies, with 20 years of experience, and I started in the brokerage area working for Gay Carpenter. I worked for them for 10 years, and I've been working with this wonderful MAPFRE group for another 10 years. But we were going to have 3 panelists here, but unfortunately, Mr. Julio Moreno, who's the CFO of Bisagro, who's based in Guatemala, has to apologize because he was not able to make it here today because of a number of reasons. So we're going to have to focus on the Mexican market during this panel discussion. But I have the honor of sitting next to the representatives of the 2 most important Mexican companies, each one in their own specific sector. We have Petróleos Mexicanos, which is better known as Pemex, that is represented by Mr. Ali Hauser, who's sitting on my right. And we also have with us today Ingenieros Civiles Asociados, also called EICA, which is a company that works in the construction business, and we have Mr. Antonio Ortega sitting on my left. The forum has been prepared in such a manner that we will allow each one of the speakers to present relevant information on their company, and then after that they will be developing their own specific subject areas. And Mr. Ali Hauser will talk about the energy reform in Mexico. Mr. Antonio Ortega will be talking about the investment plan for major infrastructures in Mexico. Then after the presentations, we will have a Q&A. And I will start off with a couple of questions for each of the panelists, and then after that, we will allow the audience to intervene, to speak. So starting off then with this introduction, and within the international economic context, the past decade produced a very high degree of volatility in the different regions of the world, but some of the emerging economies have behaved in a different manner in terms of their macroeconomic variables. And this is the case of several countries in Latin America where there's been a trend towards stability in recent years. And in the case of Mexico, we can see that the economy has developed within a framework of sustainable growth and with inflation that has stayed within the expected parameters. The structural reforms implemented by the current public administration want to become driving forces to achieve rates of growth that will produce economic and social benefits. So, without a doubt, these reforms implemented by the Mexican state through the National Development Plan, all of this is focused on several aspects of the national economy. So, the one that was approved in the energy sector represents and means, because of its cultural, economic and historic elements, before and after in the political life of the country. And at the same time, the aim is to achieve quick development that will allow the competitiveness of the country to be enhanced, together with investments in public infrastructures. And this is one of the strategic issues that will become the driving force to achieve higher rates of growth that has to be sustainable by connecting human capital to the opportunities that the economy offers. So, and as far as our industrial sector is concerned, the insurance business will have to deal with this change, with this challenge, so that it can offer the right products and services in order to deal with a completely new reality. Well, today, I'm going to talk about the energy reform in Mexico, and as I pointed out before, we have with us two people from Mexico. We have the representative from Pemex, and now under the reform, they have become one of the state production companies. Pemex was established in 1938, and until these recent modifications was working as like a decentralized body owned by the federal government and with its own equity, but without autonomy. And this body was the only one that was allowed to perform drilling operations in terms of energy resources, basically oil and gas in our country. But now, and with this new approach as a state-run company, it's still owned 100% by the state, but now it has technical, operational, and management autonomy so that it can be redesigned and transformed into a truly private corporation. So Pemex, as I said before, is represented by Mr. Aleja Hauset, who's the manager for risks and insurance, and who's in charge of assurance programs and also of the risk assessment program. And he's also the CEO of the Cox Insurance Company, AG, and which is the insurance company under the Pemex umbrella. He's got 10 years of international and national experience within Pemex in oil and gas, and he's held a number of leadership positions in terms of sales and promotion, corporate finance, and he's also worked as a trader in Pemex International, or PMI. Before that, he worked in the aeronautical business in B2B and in the toy business too. So, Don Ali, Mr. Lee, if you don't mind, you have the floor. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos, pues una vez más.
Good morning, everybody, and once again it's a pleasure to be here with you in this emblematic city of Bilbao. I think that it's the first time that this seminar is held here, and I think that this shows the change we've seen in this region, as was pointed out by Alfredo yesterday. So it's a pleasure, and this also allows me to get to know the city better, so I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So without further ado, and as Armando pointed out, Pemex in these last 76 years has been the synonym of the Mexican energy business. And the first change we have to incorporate to the way we think is that Pemex is no longer going to be the Mexican energy sector, but it's going to become another stakeholder amongst all of these competitive forces that are going to be at stake once the market is opened. But I'm the Director General, not the CEO of La Cautiva, and please let's get started. But I would like to give you some information. Well, I'd like to show what Pemex is all about. Pemex is the 8th crude producer in the world, and it has an average production of 2.4 million barrels per day. 75% of this production takes place offshore, and our expertise has to do with the shallow waters, and 87% of this production takes place in the southeastern area that I will show you a little bit more, and we export nearly 1 million barrels every day. We are the third most important exporter in the American market. And as you can see, 54% of our production has to do with heavy crude oil that is perfectly configured or adapted to the needs of the refineries in the south of the United States, who are the main consumers. And as you will see, our total revenues have grown from 2009 to 2013, and now it's $123 billion in 2012 and 13. And logically, in this particular context, with a radical slump in prices, our revenues have also slumped, and now the figure is something like $108 billion. We have 6 strategically located refineries that are operating in tandem. So that means that there's no business interruption because the system, should one of the refineries be shut down, another one can take its place to meet production requirements. But we have a strategic association with IRPAC, with Shell, and which is also a very significant consumer of our crude oil barrels, so that we can then send these barrels to Mexico in the form of diesel or gasoline. And you know that we are big consumers there. But if we now move on to the next slide, so what I said before, 87% of our production is located in the southeast of the country. And these rounds, well, they are in oil fields that can be found in this region. But if we look at the accumulated production figures that Mexico has had since Pemex was established in 1938, we're talking about nearly 58 billion barrels of crude oil. So as you can see, our reserves are talking about 80% more than what we have produced historically in terms of reserves, and in the case of prospective reserves, we also have an outstanding component in the southeast. But above all, it's important to mention what has to do with the prospective resources or drilling resources. But I think that a picture is much clearer. And as regards deep waters and considering future possibilities, if you take a look at the map, all of the red dots show the activities that are currently underway in the Gulf of Mexico that belongs to the United States, and the Mexican part is only the embryonic section. It's that little tiny bit you can see in the south. So what I want to demonstrate with this is the enormous potential we have ahead of us, because for many years Mexico has depended on an extremely generous reservoir that is called Cantarell, which is the third largest reserve of the planet. And as I say very frequently, the only thing that we know is going to happen is decline, because this oil field has declined continuously, and we've had to search for new sources of barrels, and the conditions are not that easy, they're not that generous anymore. So that means that what we have to do is establish alliances that will allow us to disperse risks and also attract investments so that we can deal with projects that are difficult to manage. And obviously, we should not just have an internal risk and deal with it on our own, but rather we have to resort to these projects. And then we have the Shell oil option. As you'll see, the Woodford or Eagle Ford reserves have continuity in Mexico, because we have at least identified 5 in Chihuahua, Sabinas, Burgos, in Tampico, Misantla, and Veracruz. And these are projects that are still in the very early stages. But in any case, and potentially, we are the 6th gas producer for Shell oil on an international scale. So there's a very big potential for the next years, for the next few years. But moving on now to the issue that has been governing our daily business, this has to do with the energy reform. But where does it come from? Well, if you go back to 2004, Mexico was producing 3.5 million barrels per day, and now, 11 years later, it's 1 million less, 2.4, 2.5. But our objective, our target for 2025 is to go back to a platform of 3 million barrels per day. And we have had a decline in the easy access reserves, but we have to open up the sector now so that we can establish alliances that will allow us to access technology and know-how in terms of deep water operations, and this is not a technology that you can just buy off the shelf unless you join an association or unless you merge with a company that already has that expertise. But now to give you some facts and figures, and it was at the beginning of the 20th century, the private sector became involved with 6 or 7 companies and with North American money and British capital, and then the expropriation took place in 1938 with President Cárdenas. So as from that moment, all of the operations produced their basis for this new company called Petróleos Mexicanos, but it wasn't until 1958 when all of the contracts with overseas companies were prohibited. So Pemex was the only operator in the energy business as from that point in time. And since then, we've seen attempts at deregulating the sector in 1995, 2003, and 2008, and I dare say that the results obtained have been, well, the reforms were more possible than desirable, and well, we know that this involves lots of elements, but the energy business has to try to keep lots of stakeholders happy and has to incorporate many different points of view. So this is why reform had not been achieved that were capable of changing the rules of the game in a significant manner. But what I'd like to say is that in September 2012, when the fourth attempt at performing a reform was about to arrive, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more depth, and if you would have asked me this question, I possibly would have been skeptical. So what I want to say to you all is that the aperture, the opening up of what we're seeing is taking place now, and what we'll see over the next 3 years is, well, it represents a change of the rules, and it's something that would also change the profile and, let's say, the overall picture that we are observing in the Mexican market. And I think that many of you, after what Mr. Castelo mentioned, I think that if you've been to Mexico, you can see that all the petrol stations are owned by Pemex. So in 3 years, and if things turns out as we expect them to happen, perhaps we'll find Repsol there, amongst other operators too. But down below, you can see what has happened in the world whilst we maintained this concentration on only one company. And obviously, Rome was not built in only one day. In 2013, it was in 2013 when the reform was published, and I will explain to you the landmarks. But why is it we are carrying out this energy reform? If you look at the examples of Colombia, and if you look at the example of Brazil, well, as from the moment when the reform was implemented, in the case of Brazil, that was in 97, and to date, or in 2013 or 14, we've seen that the crude oil production has been multiplied by 2.5 times, but in the case of Colombia, and today it's nearly 70% higher. So it's a very logic approach. We need to increase our production of barrels of crude oil, and then behind that is the willingness to open up the sector, and we can no longer manage this in an autonomous manner, because what we have to do is build bridges that lead us to all of these stakeholders. And the energy reform, as I said a couple of minutes ago, is very significant because to start off with, there was a change in the Constitution, and no changes had taken place in the last 76 years in the Constitution. So this is an issue where several political interests have to converge for this to be achieved. And the current administration promoted this from the moment they were in their campaign. And this made it possible for us to have this already in place. But what does the constitutional reform envisage? Well, to start off, there's a round zero. I call it the letter to Santa Claus. It's Pemex's letter, and they have to say, well, look, you must choose those areas in which there's more productivity and those areas in which you expect to have oil fields that will allow you in the next 10 years to maintain this production of 2.4 or 2.5 million barrels per day. And round zero, well, this was the requirement that was established in March of 2012, and then in August, the Secretariat for Energy Affairs answered and allocated to Pemex the areas in which it would be able to operate and which would allow them to maintain the level of production, which is what is happening to date. And then, on the other hand, other bodies were set up that remove all of this decision-making from Petróleo Mexicano, and now the National Commission or Committee for Hydrocarbons will be responsible for awarding each and every one of the oil fields according to the rounds agreed upon by the foreign companies that will arrive in the country to become involved in the process. And then there's a very important point, and this was mentioned by Armando in his introduction. And Pemex is going to become a state-run productive company. But what does that mean? Well, it means that as from this moment, instead of being a monopoly that has to provide absolutely everything, so regardless of whether the performance is good or bad, it doesn't make any difference. But right now, the productive company will have a remit which will be to produce value. In other words, we must only focus on those activities that do produce value. And proof of the fact, well, is that a new board of directors was established in October last year. Before, there were 6 members on the board, in other words, 6 professionals from the sector and the government, and there were another 5 members from the Mexican trade unions. And these 5 trade union members have lost their position, and they have been replaced by directors from the private sector, from the world of from the academic field. And these are people that have experience in the operation of these oil fields. So this is an important sign that shows how things are going to change in terms of the company. And in December 2014, which is when the first announcement for round 1 took place, and this is when the foundations were laid, and this involved a number of external people. And it was in the month of February when there was another call for another 5 additional blocks. And all of these blocks, and if you remember the previous map, it's the same zone that I was talking about in the Mexican southeast. But how can we implement this energy reform? It was approved in 2013. It's a reform that flies at 10,000 feet. But how can we make it land? Well, we make it land by changing 12 laws and by creating another 9. And what do these laws foresee? Well, 2 things. On the one hand, that the part that has to do with prospection and production will be under the Commission, the National Commission for Hydrocarbons, that will be responsible for regulating this part of the activity. But what are the allocations? Well, allocations are what I said just a few minutes ago. Round 0, Petróleos Mexicanos says, look, I want this oil field, I want this other oil field, I want this one on the right, this one on the left. And as from that moment, you have it. So what are you going to do with those oil fields? And you say, well, look, I've got 4 options. I can establish shared production contracts, or we could also have shared utility contracts, or we could set up licenses. And fourth, we have the services, which we'd already established previously. But why? And this is an important thing that has to be mentioned, because the first three options that I've just pointed out, that is shared production, shared use, and licenses, it was only 24 months ago was science fiction in the country's vocabulary, and this is something completely new. And as I said before, if we are successful, in 3 years' time, we'll start to see different people other than Pemex trading petrol and oil. But as regards industrial transformation, it will be the Energy Regulatory Commission that will be responsible for regulating this part of the operations, where we have refineries and where the permits will be given by Senate to the parties that are considered to be competent to perform the refinery options. And then in natural gas, it will also be Senate responsible for giving the permits. And then one final important point, and that is that Pemex is also operating in the logistics network of natural gas. So all of the natural gas pipes will be handed over to a new body that is called Senagas, that will be responsible of operating this pipeline in order to avoid a conflict of interest between the commercializer and the part that has to do with transportation.
Esto se traduce en, finalmente, ingresos.
This finally means income for the government. Let's not forget that Pemex represents 34% of the income of the Mexican tax office, and each percentage point that is affected should at least be replaced, ideally with an effort like the one is being made. It should be replaced or increased, and the allocations, which I mentioned, become contracts that may be licenses for the shared use or shared production, will generate, in the case of licenses, a bonus for the company, or contractual fees during the exploration phase, counterparts, or some hybrid of these models. And this will be the mechanism to obtain income through these contracts for the government. And also rights will be generated that will feed a fund that is very similar to the fund in the Norwegian model, to ensure that a base is generated for the creation of an industrial fabric of people that are qualified and talented to provide continuity and support for the oil industry in Mexico. And on the industrial transformation side, this is being done through income tax, through the tax department. And the makeup of our board and how it changed in October. The director of the board is the Secretary for Energy, also state representatives, 4 state representatives, plus the director, and these 5 independent members that are a sign of our will to focus on activities that are profitable. Like world-class companies, we will have specialized committees to support the board in its management of the company. The company has also changed its organization. Today, Pemex has 4 subsidiary bodies: exploration and production, refining, petrochemistry, and gas. And this year, it has been decided that the petrochemical side, refining and gas, will merge under a single body that will be called transformation and production. Opportunities for the market, exploration in deep waters, in gas, increasing the gas pipe transport capacity, and refining the move towards the private sector. So, in summary, Pemex is changed into a productive company that opens up opportunities not just for the hydrocarbon sector, but also investment opportunities for other sectors, such as the insurance sector, and this will enable us to optimize costs. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, don Ali.
Thank you very much, Ali. And now, Ingenieros Civiles Asociados, ICA, will talk about the National Infrastructure Plan. ICA is the engineering, procurement, and construction company, which is the biggest in Mexico, established in 1947. And over the years, it has worked in this country and others around the world. The company is broken down in 5 segments: civil engineering, industrial engineering, concessions, airport operations, and dwelling development. It has had an important participation in infrastructure projects, roads, dams, hospitals, thermoelectric plants, stadiums, sports centers, and, of course, residential facilities. Representing ICA, we have Antonio Ortega, who started working at PricewaterhouseCoopers from 1995 to the present time. He has worked in administration, tax, accounting, internal control, and risk administration areas at the civil construction unit, infrastructures, and housing. During his professional career, he has worked on international infrastructure projects such as Bacuna in Malaysia, the South Corridor in Panama, and the hydroelectric dam El Cajon in Mexico. He is currently corporate director for administration and risks, a position he's held since 2010 and joined and included the risk area in 2012. He forms part of the strategic and operational transformation group, implementing initiatives such as SENSAP procedures, the implementation of the shared services center, the creation of value centers, and others related to the new group's operating model. Please, Antonio, if you will give us your presentation.
Bueno, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Armando, for the invitation. Thank you, Alfredo. And congratulations on the figures. I was at the meeting 2 years ago in Seville. And I was surprised by the figures then. And I see that in 2 years, MAPFRE has continued to grow and evolve. And I think that it just shows what's happening in the world, the strategies that are being taken on. I was listening very carefully because there are many similarities with what the company I represent is doing, changes in the environment, international expansion, and rapid globalization. Strategies to make the most of these opportunities and to face everyday challenges. And one of them, and I'm going to comment on it very quickly because otherwise I'll run out of time, and also I run the risk of losing my voice. But I was listening to Ali talking about Pemex. Pemex traditionally has been one of the main customers of ICA. The federal government has been one of the main customers of ICA. I would say that on average 70-75% of the national income of ICA comes from the federal government, and a significant part from Pemex. Today, Pemex, we need to start to look at it as a customer on the one hand, but also as a partner. And proof of this is that the energy sector in Mexico, mainly represented by Pemex and Comisión Federal de Electricidad, has recently signed an association contract with ICA for the production of electricity. But apart from that, they've traditionally been our customers, so the world is changing, and congratulations to MAPFRE. Very briefly, I'm going to explain what ICA is and a brief explanation of the National Infrastructure Plan in Mexico, so that we'll have time for questions and answers. And I'm just going to give a brief presentation as an introduction to this discussion. What is ICA? ICA stands for Ingenieros Civiles Asociados. It's listed on the New York and Mexican stock market. It was established in 1947, as Armando said in his introduction, in the construction sector with 5 engineers that developed a building in a housing project. In 1992, it became a listed company in New York and Mexico. And from 2010, ICA, with its sustainable approach, was selected to form part of the Mexican stock market sustainable index. ICA today has 31,000 direct jobs, 31,000 direct employees, and generates around 12 to 15,000 indirect jobs. To give you an idea of the size, it has around 614 million shares on the stock market, and we cover 4 major business segments. One, civil construction, and also industrial construction, and I mention them both together because this is really the core business. This is what ICA started with. What does ICA do in civil construction? We build roads mainly. In the last 6 to 10 years, the opportunity in Mexico has been roads, and as we'll see in the infrastructure plan, 50% of the opportunities now come from the energy sector, and I'll show you some pictures. We build stadiums, as was mentioned, hydroelectric projects, around 60 to 65 hydroelectric projects, hydroelectric dams in Mexico and abroad. The industrial sector is the association. We have Fluor Corporation in the United States. We have a 50% stake. We don't have control. It's a shared control. It doesn't consolidate in ICA's financial figures, and ICA and Fluor are a subcontractor for Pemex. And concessions, we started to work in the 90s in Mexico, where there was a major crisis and a major problem. At the end of 1994, where there was a major devaluation in Mexico, and the construction companies had just invested in the concession system that was just opening up there in Mexico, concessions for roads mainly. They had taken out all the debt in dollars. There was a major devaluation of the 3 major construction companies that existed in Mexico. 2 practically disappeared. They were resized, and only one of them exists today with a much smaller size, and ICA was the only one to survive. And what this segment did was to generate concessions from the Mexican government, and our civil construction segment was given the construction contract, and then the concession matured. We'll see this in the ICA business chain for a limited time period. And in the airport sector, we have 13 airports. We operate in the country, and it's a public company that we have control over with a 35% stake, plus the airport of Mexico City, which isn't under a concession. We're going through changes as a result of the cycles that exist in Mexico. The 94 crisis taught us that we have to diversify, because a crisis, when we have all our eggs in the same business basket, can mean a death for the company, and that's why we got involved in concessions such as airports that provide a certain amount of stability to the business. when faced with the various cycles that exist usually in Latin American countries, economically and politically, with major falls that can raise companies. And that's why we work with airports that give us a stable cash flow, and the international area. And we'll see this later on. We have between 33 to 36% of our income abroad, mainly from South America. We are currently changing, and as of the 1st of June 2015, the major change in all of this is going to be that civil construction, which was a segment that was completely focused on construction anywhere in the world, is going to focus only on national construction and only with external customers. External customers, because often there are concessions that lead to construction contracts. They are going to be concessions that focus only on the customer, a single business, where the rate of return will be based on the concession, the construction, and the operation. Also, strategic alliances. We have greater stakeholdings in companies like ICA Fluor that we don't have a control over. Associations in Peru for housing. We have a small foundation company that works here in Spain, in Portugal, in France, Consoletange, and the international segment as a single point-to-point segment that will be managed this way for all business abroad. This is the ICA business circle that I've already explained. What do we do? This is a slide that we explain to the analysts and investors, because it's meant a lot of hard work, especially in the last 6 years, to get the analysts and investors to understand what ICA is. Because on the one hand, they're accustomed to say ICA is a construction company. And they say, if you're a construction company, why do you have a very high debt level compared to other large construction companies in the world? Well, we have a high debt level, which isn't bad because it's associated to projects, because we have a lot of involvement as a concessionary, and the capital structure means that we provide around 60 to 70% debt and 30–40% assets. That's why we have a very high debt level. If you're a concessionary or an infrastructure operator, why do you have such low EBITDA margins compared to a DHL or others? Well, we have low EBITDA margins and a low generation of effective cash flow because the construction projects which provide income have lower EBITDA levels. So it's very difficult for us to be understood. And on top of that, in our consolidated figures, we have housing segments and we have airport operations. So it's a very diverse mix of figures. And what we explain with this is what ICA does. And it's not just a construction sector in the past where we work with public tenders. We go to the customer to provide infrastructure solutions. We provide financing solutions. The major project at ICA is the El Cajón project, starting in the early 2000s. The federal government had the need to carry out this project, which started being $700 million. It ended up being almost $900 million. There wasn't a solution, and we proposed the financing, and that's what made it viable. And this is the second stage. The third is construction, operations and growth, and portfolio administration. We don't provide the whole cycle. We promote, build. This lasts about 2 years. We mature the concession. That takes 3 or 4 years. And then all our concessionary assets are up for sale. We're not long-term infrastructure operators. There are special funds for that purpose. So we recycle the company's capital. When the projects go from greenfield to brownfield and they're mature, there we recover the value of the investment, we obtain a return, and normally we make it available to funds. And we're currently going through a transaction that we recently announced where a Canadian fund is buying 49% of 4 of our roads, and that's where we recycle our capital. That's our business model. Very quickly, I said I was going to be very quick, and I think I'm doing the opposite. The ICA consolidated figures, 36 billion pesos per year in 2014. We come from a very low year by comparison, a very low year, which for me represents an opportunity. In a crisis, we have to see it as an opportunity, and this led to this new model I've just explained, with EBITDA margins of around 17%, 6 billion pesos. Our income comes mainly from the construction sector, 80%, but the cash flow generation, 39%, comes from the concession segment, where we operate and where we do obtain cash flow by charging tolls or fees for operating plants. 26 billion with lower EBITDA margins here. What projects? The hydroelectric project we can see here, roads in Mexico, some bridges, treatment plants, and some icons that people in Mexico don't know who built them. And in Mexico, they're icons like the Guadalupe Basilica a number of years ago and the Azteca Stadium. The concession segment has a lower income but higher EBITDA levels, around 50%. These are the types of concessions we have. And the two roads on the left and the one bottom right are one of the 4 projects, apart from the Acapulco tunnel, where we've recently been selling 49% to the Canadian fund to close the value circle and reinvest that capital in new projects and restart the circle. These are our airports with extremely high margins, and it's a business that provides stability to ICA's cash flow. This is the ICA strategy. Very quickly, we're looking for global growth backed up by the international sector, the international business, with very strong risk administration. It's an approach that in 2012 didn't exist. There wasn't a risk management job as such. Risk was seen as a general risk, but the market is changing, and it's changing in such a way. And there's a hydroelectric project, which I explained, that started costing 700 million and ended up costing 900 million at the beginning of 2000. And a couple of years ago, we've just concluded an identical project, the La Yesca hydroelectric project, that was tendered at 800 million and ended up costing $1.3 billion. And risk management is required to control the variations and changes in projects of this magnitude. And here we can see our growing participation in income from the international sector, with a presence mainly in 4 countries, Panama, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Peru, which is where in recent years we have found economic and political stability. And we also have a smaller participation and without a stable permanence in countries like Chile, and we're exploring other opportunities in the South Cone. What's coming for Mexico? To quickly move on to the figures of the National Infrastructure Plan, these are the opportunities we see. This is the company's pipeline, and the mix of opportunities in Mexico is changing from the road sector to the energy sector. We see opportunities amounting to 152 billion pesos in the energy sector, 130 billion in the road sector, with all these examples. In trains, there are also many opportunities, and certainly in the area of water, social area, and ports. This is just the pipeline for Mexico. We have the same pipeline size for overseas. And I'll go into more details if we have the time. The National Infrastructure Plan has the aim of making Mexico competitive transversely and longitudinally by establishing a regional balance in the country, providing opportunities to each region, and its focus from the national viewpoint to the regional viewpoint, and it's related to energy, housing, transportation and telecommunications. It's a project amounting to 7.7 billion pesos with 743 projects, and it represents 8.3% of the GDP from 2014 to 2018. It's a very aggressive plan from the federal government, as you can imagine. We're a very volatile company. As soon as the federal government announced this plan, the company shares had to be stopped from being listed on the market on that day because of the increase in the price of the share. But the opposite is also true. As soon as the government announces that it's probably going to have a zero base plan for 2016, the opposite happens, unfortunately, with significant drops in share prices. But we see very significant opportunities, and this is part of all the changes that are taking place in Mexico. And as I said, opportunities such as the energy reform, the national infrastructure plan, and other challenges, because there are also the opposite effects. In the same way that there are energy reforms and opportunities, there are also tax reforms in Mexico that represent a challenge for Mexican companies. One of them is the end in 2013 of the tax consolidation regime. And this meant that when there were 7 subsidiaries, some that made profits and others were losses, taxes were only paid on the total sum. There wasn't an effective cash flow, so a complete change was made in the law. So now the tax consolidation regimen is finished, and all losses you had generated in the past in certain subsidiaries now have to be paid for over a 10-year period, and this is something that hadn't been considered. So this also has to be taken into account. And how are we coping with this? There's also an opportunity from the government for public-private partnerships with the government, and this just means proposing solutions to the government with a 67% government stakeholding and 30-40% stakeholding, and it means working hand in hand. And I'll finish here. I've already been shown the red light, so I speeded up a bit here at the end, but I think that we'll have time to do a Q&A session to expand on all this. Thank you all very much.
Thank
you very much, Don Antonio.
Por tema de tiempo, me concentraré básicamente en hacer una sola pregunta a cada uno de los ponentes.
We don't have much time, so I'll just put one question to each of the speakers.
Si ustedes quieren también hacer alguna pregunta en función de cómo
and if you have any questions, depending
se sigue desempeñando el tema de tiempo,
on how we're doing for time,
invitaremos a que ahora en el momento del café o un poco más adelante.
Perhaps we can discuss things during the coffee break or later on. Perhaps you can come up to the 2 speakers and put your questions to them. I'll start with Don Ali. I would like to ask, how does Pemex currently see, with the structural changes that you explained in your presentation, how does it see its position within the Mexican energy market? Well, I think it's a great opportunity for Pemex to make use of the energy reform, to establish these alliances to make it possible to share the risk with several players. And we're seeing this specifically in projects like Ramones, which is going to connect the south of the United States with central Mexico. And we already have 45% of the BlackRock investment, and we're going to continue to see this in the deep water project when we start to see a price that makes it possible to take these projects forward. But in the shallow water area where Pemex has expertise, as I said earlier, we will focus on the areas where we have competitive advantages. Thank you very much. And for you, Antonio, what are the main challenges for the risk managers in construction companies in relation to project developments in Mexico? The changes that are taking place. We're contractors for the federal government, but we understand the needs, the time frame, the costs they have. So we become, although it's not the legal figure, we become their partners. There are many projects that the federal government has to get underway. And first we have to obtain the rights. And that is one of the first risks we face, because that completely changes the program. And to give you an example, concessionary projects where we take out a debt, we have to hedge with interest rates or exchange rates that become completely non-effective when the rights haven't been awarded yet, and the association of the credit or the loans turns the derivative instruments and makes them ineffective, and that's where the problems start in risk management. And another issue are those projects where they're not suitably, there isn't a suitable evaluation of the geology, for example, and you face geological conditions that were considered in the contract, and most of the contracts are not a unit price contracts, and this is also a contractual system that we're still learning from in Mexico, and this can affect the price of the project or the cost of the project by as much as 50%, and this means that we have to have more and more careful planning. And this means that the risk area is a key area within the organization to make the projects quick and viable, because, as I said, the opportunities are significant and we see ourselves as partners of our customers. Well, thank you very much. Considering that we've run out of time, you can talk to Ali or Antonio during these 2 days to clarify any doubts you may have, or if you'd like to ask them something. So I would just like to thank the panelists for their contribution, and all of you for your kind attention. Thank you very much, and have an excellent day.